To start things off, I'm pleased to introduce our keynote speaker, Rachel Wilson. Rachel is a managing director and head of cybersecurity for Morgan Stanley Wealth Management and Investment Technology. Her team has driven cybersecurity innovation in securing both firm and client data. And her experience is deep. She spent 15 years at the NSA, where tasks included counterterrorism and cybersecurity at the 2012 London Summer Olympics. So if you would, join me in welcoming Rachel Wilson. Thank you very much, Rachel. I really appreciate it.
Well, Joe, thank you for that warm, very warm introduction. And thank you to all of you for having me here today. In working with your teams, I have been so looking forward to this, and I'm so excited about the totality of your agenda over this time period. I want to start by thanking all of you for what you do for the state of North Carolina day in, day out. I can tell you, as someone who's dedicated the last 25 years of her life to trying to keep folks safe, the work that you do day in and day out for our communities means the world to me. So as Joe mentioned, I run cybersecurity, data protection, fraud prevention for Morgan Stanley's wealth management business. And what that means in a nutshell is that I and my team are responsible for making sure that every system, every network, every application that we field to our 15,000 financial advisors around the country and our 15 million clients around the world, that all of those things are as time-tested, battle-hardened, hacker-proofed as possible before we push them out there in the world. So just like all of you, making sure that North Carolina has power 24/7, 365 days a year, I and my team make sure that our customers are well served around the clock for all of their financial needs. But as Joe mentioned, I spent the first 15 years of my career all at the National Security Agency, the NSA, where I had a few different jobs. I spent a couple of years running the NSA's counterterrorism operations mission. Think of this as using technical means to get onto the devices used by terrorists, their tablets, their smartphones, their laptops, with the goal of reading their email, listening to their phone calls, geolocating them, and then, of course, my favorite part of the job, what we used to call kinetic remediation. This was, of course, putting some metal on target, taking these bad guys off of the battlefield. Did that for a few years. For the ladies in the room, this is when I started coloring my hair. Pretty stressful job. So as a bit of a reward, Joe, I got to then spend a few years helping the British get ready for the 2012 Summer Olympics. Now, I'm sure all of you, just like me, super excited about Paris this summer. The Olympics are great fun, but they are also a tremendous target for terrorists and for hackers. Every 4 years when that games rolls around, the eyes of the world pivot to that city, that country, and that includes all of those baddies out there. So you could imagine 2012 in London, the British, given their history, very well versed in terrorist plotting. They had those threats well in hand. So what did we do? We took a divide and conquer approach. We told the Brits, you cover the terrorist plotting. We Americans will come in. We will build a full security operations center in the basement of the American embassy. That's what we did. And we will be responsible for those cyber threats. So this was the Chinese trying to hack into the clocks, the timers at the Olympic venues. This was the Russians trying to get into the databases that housed all the Olympic drug testing records. Right, which makes perfect sense now, made no sense to us at the time. All kinds of miscreants looking to rub some grit in the eyes of the British. I was thrilled to see those games go off without a hitch, and then to return to suburban Maryland, where the NSA is headquartered, to spend my last 5 years at the NSA in what I would tell all of you on a personal note was my dream job. This was the job that I had wanted from the day that I started at the NSA, and that was running the NSA's cyber exploitation operations mission. So think of this as your professional American hackers. So in this job, I would travel around the country to the top computer science and computer engineering programs at the best American universities, and I would try to recruit these young computer engineers to come work for me. Now, these kids, of course, were getting big six-figure offers at Google and Facebook and Amazon, and I was trying to convince them to come work for government peanuts. Didn't always work, but I did have one thing in my pitch that no one else could offer, and that was the opportunity, frankly, to do something that would be illegal anywhere else. And for a particular ilk of young person, you probably know some of these kids, the opportunity to no longer be beholden to the Computer Fraud and Abuses Act, quite an alluring proposition. So we'd bring these kids in, we'd give them 18 months of highly classified training, and then we would conduct hundreds of operations a day, hacking into the networks of the Russians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, stealing the secrets out of their networks, giving them to our policymakers, our war fighters, all with the goal of keeping the United States and her allies safe. Now, I tell you this was a dream job. That was in part because as a technologist, I got to work pretty much every technology on the planet, including a bunch of things you can't even buy in the United States. So think indigenous Iranian firewalls, cracked versions of Windows that you can only find in North Korea. We'd have to have these things diplomatically pouched in. We'd reverse engineer them. We would discover vulnerabilities in them to use back against our enemies. Also a dream job because as a leader, I got to lead a team of incredibly brilliant and very weird patriots in doing a job that for us really was truly profound, bringing back what we used to call eye-watering intelligence. So information that was so remarkable that when you thought about the fact that you were going to put it on the president's desk the next morning, brought a little tear to your eye. You all can tell that I am incredibly proud of the work that the NSA and the intelligence community did in my tenure. I remain incredibly proud of the work that they do to protect and defend us day in, day out. And I have never been more proud than these last few years. You think Russia, Ukraine, China, the whole situation now in the Middle East. These men and women are working 24/7, 365 days a year to protect us. But I will tell you, North Carolina electric cooperatives, not every part of this job was all like rainbows and unicorns. There were some real challenges with being the quote-unquote queen of the hackers for the NSA. Top of the list of my management challenges, hygiene. Big problem for these men. And gentlemen, I will assure you they were 98% men. Hygiene not at the top of their list. Got to the point where I actually had to stage shower caddies in my office. Folks would come in the morning. We'd give Joe a little bit of the sniff test. Is he ready for human interaction yet today? The answer was no. We sent him with the shower caddy downstairs. Come back when you smell better, Joe. Okay. Second big problem as the queen of the hackers, gaming addiction. I kid you not, a serious problem for young people in America today. I was not familiar with the symptoms of gaming addiction back then, but now as the mother of a 17-year-old son, I think I'm an expert. I know exactly what this looks like, but back then we actually had to bring a psychologist in on staff. We were staging Xbox interventions, PlayStation confiscations. We're getting mothers and girlfriends and sisters involved. Think about it this way. If you have an employee who doesn't show up to work on time, that's a problem. But if you don't show up to work on time at the NSA, I have to send the police to your house. I have to work with the assumption that you're on a plane to Moscow because, right, that happened. So getting folks to come to work on time, huge challenge, all as a result of video games. I can tell you in my day job now at Morgan Stanley, people come to work on time, they smell pretty good. Aspects of my day job are much better than they used to be. So, what are we going to talk about this afternoon? I have a lot of ground that I want to cover with all of you. I'm going to start this afternoon by giving you a quick tour, world tour of my sleepless nights. I do not sleep well in this job as the head of cybersecurity for a large bank, and if I do my job right this afternoon, none of you will sleep well tonight either. We will all be cyber insomniacs together. We will take this world tour. Then I will pivot to the things that I worry about for all of you in your positions. The world, 25 years as a cybersecurity professional, I've never seen things as bad as they are today. The situation, the threat landscape, the risk environment has never been more dire. So we'll talk through the things that I worry about for all of you. But of course, in talking to Joe and talking to your leaders here, I recognize that you are here today wearing many hats, right? You're of course here in your cooperative capacity, but you are also mothers and fathers and sons and daughters, sisters and brothers, and in all of those capacities, what I will argue this afternoon is that you are experiencing cyber risk wearing all of those hats. So we'll talk about all of those capacities. My hope today is that all of you will take one thing away from this conversation. I have no hope or expectation that you are going to take furious notes and you're going to change your life from a cybersecurity perspective. I tell people all the time that cybersecurity is not about perfection. It is really about not being the sickest gazelle in the herd. So that is my hope, is that you will pick one thing. We will all run a little bit faster coming out of here this afternoon. Does that sound like a plan? Okay, so what am I worried about? My sleepless nights as head of cybersecurity, top of my list for the last 7 years, without a doubt, North Korea. Why? North Korea, of course, is up against staunch international sanctions, has no domestic economy to speak of, and yet is trying to fund a wildly expensive missile and nuclear program. So how are they doing this? How is North Korea funding its government in 2024? Well, they've essentially made it a major plank of their national strategy that they are going to fund their government by hacking into banks and stealing money, right? That old adage, why rob banks? It's where the money is. We just never expected to see a country take this on as the source of their gross domestic product. But that is exactly what North Korea has done. And they've done this, unfortunately, with tremendous success. In no small part due to the fact that they have resourced this bank hacking strategy at a very high level. So estimates have it at now 7,000 people within North Korea that have bank hacking as their full-time job, and those ranks just continue to grow. I tell my kids all the time how fortunate they are that they did not grow up in North Korea. My teenage daughter says that having me as a mom feels a little bit like living in North Korea. This is not fair. The reality is that in North Korea, when you turn 11, you are administered an aptitude test. You score best and brightest on that North Korean intelligence exam, and you are immediately on-ramped into the bank hacking program. These kids, raised, trained to be bank hackers, moved into dormitories away from their families at the age of 11. And of course, it's worse than that. Not only are they prolific, but they're good. Some of you will be familiar with the Bank of Bangladesh heist. If you have not read up on it, listen to the podcast, read the book. This is the notorious Lazarus Group. Advanced persistent threat actors for the North Koreans successfully hacked into the Central Bank of Bangladesh and carted off close to $100 million over a long weekend. These are non-trivial dollar sums that they're going after here. Now, what not everyone knows about this particular heist is that the North Koreans were literally a typographical error away, a spelling mistake away from this being close to $1 billion, an eighth the reserves of the entire nation of Bangladesh, this close to gone in 3 days. And this was not a one-off for North Korea. Again, this is their strategy for funding their government, so much so that last year the United Nations published a report supporting the allegations of 27 countries around the world, all of whom are asserting that the North Koreans have come after their central bank to the tune of more than $3 billion over the last 3 years. Now, that number is stunning when you think about the volume of losses, but it is horrifying when you think about where that money is going, right into their missile and nuclear program. Now, if we take a step back from North Korea, at a level right below North Korea, but not far below, and frankly at the top of my list for the last 6 months, what am I worried about? Iran. Now, Iran, of course, is not hacking us for money. They have long recognized what we know, right, which is that cyber represents an asymmetric threat. You think about it. Sailing an aircraft carrier into New York Harbor, that's a decade-long project. Building a nuclear weapon, thank goodness, has proven to be very challenging. So what have the Iranians done in the past when they needed to retaliate against the West? Well, think about what they did between 2012 and 2014, literally going bank to bank to bank on Wall Street, 46 banks over 2.5 years, conducting wildly disruptive denial of service attacks, all in retaliation for economic sanctions against the Central Bank of Iran, against the Iranian oil industry, retaliating for military action, cyber attacks, any one of us potentially a target. And now, think about what's going on in the Middle East. Who's Hamas really? It's Iran. They're the funding, the inspirational leadership behind all of this. When tensions are fraught in the Middle East, Iran is coming after us. Now, of course, why are we having this conversation today? Joe alluded to this. And in addition to all of these nation states, the seed of fear that I want to plant with all of you is actually about the dramatic rise of what we call now cyber criminal syndicates. These are traditional organized crime rings that are now using cyber means to conduct their crime at a scope, a scale, a velocity that frankly boggles the mind. If you went back in time 5 years ago, the vast majority of quote-unquote malicious cyber activity that you would have seen on the internet was nation states, right? It was Rachel in her NSA capacity. It was the British, the Israelis, the Russians, the Chinese, all of these countries hacking each other to steal secrets and to conduct espionage. Now, make no mistake, all of that nation-state level hacking activity is still going on at a scale greater than ever before, but it is now dwarfed by the volume of malicious cyber activity that is criminal in nature and that is financially motivated. And what does this mean? It means these hackers are opportunistic, they're egalitarian. They are not hacking you because you are you. They are targeting you because you are vulnerable. Simply doing scans of broad swaths of the internet, looking for anyone. Get access, monetize that access. 70% now of hacking is about stealing money. And that means that any of us, in any of our capacities, personally, professionally, nonprofit, our house of worship, our university, any entity with two nickels to rub together, potentially a target for these cyber actors. Now, in the last 2 years, the threat of cybercrime through the roof. Why? Because of the proliferation of artificial intelligence. You went back in time 5 years ago. What did you need to do to be a hacker? Well, you needed an advanced degree. You needed nation-state training. You needed access to a nation-state toolkit. Who were cyber criminals 5 years ago? All too often, they were those same North Korean hackers we just talked about. Now, you think about it. North Korean government hackers, they're not getting paid. Right, they're certainly a well-motivated workforce because we know the consequences of poor job performance in North Korea, but they're not well compensated. So what was the perk? What was the benny to being that North Korean government hacker? It was that you got to take that cyber toolkit home with you nights and weekends and use it for your own personal betterment. Maybe working for another government on contract, hacker for hire, working for one of these cyber groups, maybe working as a hacktivist. These are hackers that hack for political reasons. Now what do you need to do to be a cyber criminal? Well, you need access to ChatGPT, a little bit of that open AI, some artificial intelligence, and how do our kids learn how to do everything now? They simply watch YouTube videos. So if I've got internet access and I can access ChatGPT and OpenAI, I can be quite sophisticated cyber actor in a matter of days. Now let me give you an example of the sort of cyber crime at scale that I see in my day job on a day-to-day basis. This is an attack we experienced at Morgan Stanley 2 weeks ago that, Joe, I had the pleasure of presenting to Morgan Stanley's board of directors last week. Didn't go very well. You'll soon see why. So you go back in time. What did we experience? Well, imagine the hacker goes out to the dark web. You know, that's just the part of the internet that's not indexed. You can't get there through a Google search. None of y'all are going to end up there accidentally, right? He ends up on the dark web and he buys 10 million credential pairs, logins and passwords. These logins and passwords have nothing to do with you or your bank. These are the logins and passwords from the Home Depot breach, the Target breach, LinkedIn, Equifax. In this case, it was the 10 millions in logins from Uber last summer. You all remember Uber got hacked. Hacker went after the database that houses all the customer logins and passwords, dumps them all for sale on the dark web. Why does this new hacker want all of those logins and passwords from the Uber hack last summer? It's because he knows that many of us are victims of that particular form of human frailty that causes us to reuse the same password again and again and again. Now, Joe, I know we've got a really smart crowd here today, and none of you are doing this, right? Oh my goodness, I'm seeing so many smiles. You guys are freaking me out. Using the same password everywhere, knowing that if it gets compromised anywhere, you are then at risk everywhere you've used it. But passwords are a pain, and people are lazy. And so that's what the hacker is hoping, is that maybe the password you were using at Uber is the same one you're using for your bank account. So he's going to take those 10 million logins and passwords, and he's going to try them all against my front door, my authentication gateway, just to see what sticks. But think about how long that would take him to fat finger in all of those logins and passwords. He'd be doing that for the rest of his life. So what do? Artificial intelligence to the rescue. Now, I go back to ChatGPT. I get it to script up an attack. I go back to the dark web and I rent what's called a botnet. What's a botnet? Simply thousands of highly hackable endpoint devices. These are your Internet of Things type devices, smart TVs, smart toasters. In this case, we were under attack by a herd of smart refrigerators. Imagine how this went with the board. I'm telling them we're under attack by a herd of smart refrigerators. They all want to know, Rachel, what was the make and model of refrigerator? Was my refrigerator implicated in this attack? All the wrong questions. Bottom line, thousands of refrigerators throwing millions of credential pairs against your front door. The botnet is not smart, right? All it returns is a simple thumbs up, thumbs down. Vast majority of cases, thumbs down. This login and password do not work for any customer of this bank. But for that small but non-zero percentage that return a thumbs up, what happens next? Hacker starts logging into those accounts, setting up bill payments, money movements, all the kinds of things you would have seen a traditional fraudster do, but now with AI at scope, at scale, at velocity. This is the world as we see it now in 2024. Which brings me to what I worry about for all of you. For me, 2024 has become the year of the 3 R's. And Joe, you used one of them, reliability. First two, Russia and ransomware. Between Russia, ransomware, and reliability, I think we've defined the cybersecurity landscape for 2024. Let's start with Russia. Now, I need to ask all of you a question. The last 3 years of this war with Russia-Ukraine, we have not seen a full frontal, hard-on, attributable cyber attack from Russia. Who here thinks that Putin and his cyber army are just sitting this one out, right? Sitting on their hands, not doing anything, that highly potent, well-trained, prolific cyber army of Russia's is just taking a pass on this one. Yeah, parts of the country, every hand goes up. I get very confused in those parts of the country. Bottom line, and I say this to you as a patriot and as a former civil servant, I say this begrudgingly. The Russian cyber strategy these last 3 years has frankly been ingenious. What the Russians are doing is hiding in the noise. That 70% of malicious cyber activity that is criminal in nature and that is financially motivated, the Russians don't want escalation. They don't want attribution. But what they have achieved is a bona fide bloodletting of American industry over these last 3 years. Tremendous cost, both to American industry and to Ukrainian refugees, all without blowing a feather. Now, how are they doing this? Well, I want to give you an example that I've seen in financial services, but I want all of you to think about this through the lens of your business. What might cyber activity, nation-state, Russian-sponsored cyber activity look like in your environment? So let's go back in time to before the start of the war between Russia and Ukraine. If you were to ask 3 years ago, your typical American retail bank, your Bank of America, your Wells Fargo, your PNC, what percentage of the accounts being opened at Bank of America every day were fraudulent? Do you have a guess, sir? What percentage would you guess? 20%? Reasonable guess. We would have loved 20%. Turns out that even 3 years ago, upwards of 40% of the bank accounts being opened every day at big American retail banks were fraudulent, which is a stunning number when you think about it. So what was going on? Why is someone opening all of these fraudulent bank accounts? Well, as it turns out, there are these huge human farms in places like Bangladesh, Ghana, Sierra Leone, huge warehouses filled with people sitting next to stacks of stolen identities, opening an account in your name at Bank of America, another account in your name at Wells Fargo, linking those two bank accounts, and harvesting the 75-cent micro deposit that banks send each other when you link an account. You've all done this. You link your bank account to some external party, and they send those itty-bitty micro deposits back and forth to prove that both of those accounts are real. Now, 75 cents doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're doing this hundreds of times a day across hundreds of people, I can tell you there were entire communities in Bangladesh that were being supported by the harvesting of these microdeposits. How did we know? Well, eventually the US government told us, but we started to catch on when the fraud was very much linked to the monsoon season. Monsoons, fraud's through the roof. Rain ends, everyone goes out to harvest crops, fraud plummets. This was true across the board. Now you would ask yourself, why weren't the banks doing anything about this? And the reality is that preventing that fraudulent account from being opened would have cost more than 75 cents. So the banks were just viewing this as a retail shrinkage problem, a cost of doing business, 75 cents, hundreds of thousands of times every month across these big retail banks. Now let's fast forward to 3 months prior to the invasion of Ukraine. The Russians see exactly what's going on here, and they decide to capitalize. Suddenly it's January. We're on the phone because, of course, just like you all in this cooperative, we all work together in banking. We, the Big Nine, we talk to each other every morning. What's going on in your world? What's going on in mine? We're on the call, and my friend at Bank of America is like, Rachel, we're at 65% fraud now. Like, we were at 40%. Now we're at 65. What's going on? Like, this is starting to really hurt. Fast forward to February, we're a month prior to tanks. The banks are now suddenly at 75% fraud. 75% of the accounts being opened at Wells Fargo every morning are fraudulent. Fast forward now to March. Tanks are staged. We know that this war is about to be launched. My best friend at PNC, this guy has been my best friend for 25 years, calls me on a Saturday morning. I will never forget this. He's like, Rachel, we're going to have an emergency call. We're at 95% fraud. It had cost them $14 million over 2 weeks, and they had made the decision as a leadership team to take their new account opening flow off of the internet altogether. Other banks did exactly the same thing, and for a 3-week period at the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, you could not open a bank account in the United States online. You had to walk into a branch and talk to a real person. Now, what was really going on here? Was this criminal in nature? Nope. Took us a couple months to figure it out, and again, some help from our intelligence community brethren. But when we realized what had happened here, and I can tell a bunch of you have already gotten the joke, this was nothing to do with stealing money. Although it was tremendously expensive for the financial services sector, this was a bona fide denial of service attack. This is the same 3-week period that millions of Ukrainian refugees are trying to move their money, their cash, into the safe harbor of American bank accounts, and the Russians single-handedly, but in a completely non-escalatory and unattributed way, managed to stymie the flight of capital out of Ukraine, deny those refugees the ability to move money, while costing American banks tens of millions of dollars. Think again about what this looks like through the lens of your industry. Everywhere I go across the United States, I am hearing similar stories from all industries describing this bloodletting that is designed, again, to impair Ukrainian refugees while making this war expensive for us. Now, if that weren't bad enough, think about my second R, ransomware. Ransomware attacks, far and away the most lucrative form of cyber attack the world has ever seen. Why are these attacks so lucrative? It's because we all continue to pay. And the more we pay these ransoms, the more we incentivize these kinds of cyber attacks. Now, these companies, and I will call them companies because if they were legitimate, they are globally distributed, highly commoditized, very sophisticated in what they do. These ransomware attacks are not that pop-up asking for $500 in iTunes gift cards anymore. These are triple extortion scams. The hackers start by getting access to your environment. This could be your company. This could be the nonprofit that you support, your church. This could be your university, your endowment, any entity with money to rub together, right? Potential targets. They get into your environment and they steal whatever you value most. That could be personnel information, the social security numbers of your employees. That could be your customer information, their billing records. That could be your proprietary information. They steal whatever they think you would be willing to pay to have restored, whatever you would be willing to pay not to have posted on the dark web. Once they have siphoned off all of your data, the next thing they're going to do is irrevocably encrypt your business environment. You come in on a Monday morning, the computers don't work, back-end databases are corrupted, production environment is down, your front-end website has been defaced. You are, for all intents and purposes, dead in the water. You will then receive the first of 3 very spooky phone calls. Hacker's going to call you, "Happy Monday. You'll notice everything's broken. If you would like your systems to work again, we are happy as the hackers to help. We're just going to need $500,000 in this cryptocurrency account in South Africa by 2 o'clock. And if you don't pay by 2, make it $600,000. They will continue to ratchet up the ransom. Now, I can tell you at Morgan Stanley, we never recommend paying a ransom. Why? Because when you pay, you have now announced to the world that you are a person who is willing to pay. And the hackers will just keep coming back. Your name will, no kidding, be on that sucker list on the dark web of someone who's happy to pay. City of Baltimore, municipality near and dear to my heart, all those years of living in Maryland, has now paid a ransom 6 times to the same hacking group to restore their systems, $12 million in taxpayer dollars down the tube to these groups. Maybe you pay. Here's the irony. You will then have the best customer service experience of your life. These hackers will be on the phone with your IT people. They will get all your computers up and running, your servers debugged, your routers are all fixed. My clients tell me their computers have never worked better than the day after their ransomware experience. And the kicker, they will actually send you a customer survey on Tuesday. How was your ransomware experience with us? Why are they so reputationally sensitive? It's because they want you to come back to this summit next year and say, yeah, she was right. We got hacked by the Bulgarians, but it was delightful. We got everything restored. But the hackers, even if you pay, they are not done. Again, these are triple extortion scams. Hackers will call back the next day and say, it was great doing business with you. We forgot to mention, while we were in your environment, we stole all of your sensitive data. And if you don't want us to post all your customers' billing information on the dark web, sell all of your employees' social security numbers, we're going to need another $500,000 in that cryptocurrency equivalent. And now we know that you are both willing and able to pay. So if you could have it there by 2 o'clock, that would be great. Maybe you pay, maybe you don't. Hackers are still not done, because the hackers know what every single one of you in this room knows. You do not want a one-time sale, right? You want a continuous revenue model. What the hackers want is for you to sign up for ransomware as a service. The hackers are going to call you back on Wednesday and said, this has been so much fun. You know, your systems are up and running and we didn't sell your data. But if you want your systems to work tomorrow, and if you don't want us to sell your data on the dark web tomorrow, we're going to need a monthly fee in perpetuity in exchange for this promise, this honor amongst thieves. And the real crazy part is this is actually mafia-style protection money, because the hackers will also agree to help protect you from other hacking groups that want to come and do the exact same thing. This, thousands of dollars a month, I can tell you, I've got hundreds of clients now who are not happily but are quite willingly paying one Eastern European hacking gang who is theoretically protecting them from the rest. This the brave new world we are living in, which gets us to reliability. What do we do to prevent these kinds of cyber attacks in the future? Well, the most important thing every one of you can do, personally and professionally, is to keep all of your devices fully patched and up to date. And by a patch, I simply mean that software update that you're always getting on your phone. All software manufacturers, Microsoft, Google, Apple, they are constantly discovering new flaws, new bugs, new vulnerabilities in their code base. They are fixing those vulnerabilities, and they are issuing to us as consumers the fix in the form of that patch, that software update. Do not be like my daughter when you get that Apple iOS update. She says, "Mom, no new fonts, no new emojis. I can't go without my phone for 20 minutes. Update your phone." When that patch, that software update is released, that is when we enter into the greatest period of vulnerability with the hackers. For us, that patch, that software update is the solution to the security vulnerability we didn't even know we had. But for the hackers, that patch is an opportunity. It is a treasure map. The hacker is going to reverse engineer that patch, discover the underlying vulnerabilities that it mitigates, and weaponize those vulnerabilities against anyone who has not yet patched. The onus is on us as consumers to update our phones quickly so that those vulnerabilities cannot be used against us. We're going to open it up to questions in a few minutes, but I want to leave you with one last piece of advice, and this is the number one thing that I see people doing wrong in the cybersecurity space. We talked about the pain that are passwords, and you all promised me that you are not using the same or similar password again and again and again. But you're lying, because we all do it. Client I spoke to this morning, lovely woman named Barbara, who I think, Joe, I'm going to be getting to be really good friends with over the next few weeks, because this woman's doing a lot of things wrong. She calls this morning, we reach out to her, she calls us back, because yesterday, Barbara picked up the phone. That was her first mistake. You never want to pick up the phone. Picked up the phone and became convinced that Microsoft was calling her. Microsoft is never going to call you. Even when you want them to call you, they are not going to call you. Barbara becomes convinced they're calling her because she has malware on her computer and they are there to fix it. Barbara has a MacBook. Why was Microsoft calling her about her MacBook? None of this struck her as strange. Barbara says, okay, she gives him remote access to her computer. He then proceeds to spend 4 hours on the phone with her, tells her her computer is fixed, but they just need to make sure everything is working. So he has Barbara log into all of her email accounts, bank accounts, brokerage accounts, IRS.gov, Social Security Administration. Of course, he's installed a keystroke logger. He's taken screenshots of every website she's going to. By the end of 4 hours, comprehensive identity theft, wholesale credential compromised. Barbara is hacked 8 ways from Sunday. Barbara doesn't know this. I call her this morning. I'm like, Barbara, you've either been hacked or you are on a very exotic vacation to Gabon, Africa, because all the logins to your account really don't look like you. She says, oh, Rachel, I was hacked, but Microsoft fixed it. I'm like, oh, no, right? This isn't going to go well. We have a whole conversation. Barbara admits to me at the end that she has been using the password kittens25 everywhere, all the time for the last decade. And I give her the same ranty speech I'm about to give all of you, that she's got to stop doing this and that I want her to start using a password manager app. Are any of you using one of these? These are things like Dashlane, LastPass, Keeper, 1Password. The tech behind them is all largely the same. What they do is create for you unique passwords for all of your logins, and then they store those crazy passwords for you in a cryptographically sound way. So an encrypted state then you don't need to remember these passwords because they're going to be auto-filled right into that password field for you based on either a passphrase that only you know, or even better, that biometric on your device. Now, why do I love these password manager apps so much? First, they're going to give you a unique password for all of your logins. No more kittens25 everywhere all the time. They're going to give you a password that is maximally lengthy and complex. If it's a 50-character password field, it will generate a 50-character password for you. Random alphanumerics that we as human beings are terrible at coming up with, but the computers are really good at generating. But my favorite thing about these password manager apps is the storage of your passwords. Any of you today who are storing your passwords in a notes file on your phone, Word document or Excel file on your home computer, or my least favorite, that Post-it note under the keyboard. Terrible places to be storing your passwords. You want to leverage that government-grade encryption to store them. So I have this whole conversation with Barbara. We get to the end of it. She says, Rachel, I hear you. I'm going to add an exclamation point. Kittens25 for the next decade. This is how Barbara's going to fool the North Koreans. This has been so much fun this afternoon. I so appreciate you, North Carolina. Joe, let's take some questions.
As Rachel said, for a few questions, and then after we finish the questions, I'll give you a little brief on our break, but Rachel has graciously agreed to stay during the break to answer more questions. But let me just open it up first to folks that might be brave enough to answer a question. Of course, Brian, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. It was great. Which is a more significant impact, nation-state hacking or those doing so for economic benefit?
So this is such a good question, and I will tell you, for all of you, I am equally worried about both, right? You run a key piece of America's critical national infrastructure, so you see it. I mean, things like Colonial Pipeline, that could be your tomorrow. I totally worry about nation-state cyber actors coming after all of you. At the same time, you have a bunch of sensitive data, you perform a critical function, you have thousands of employees whose data you have, so you could be essentially monetized in multiple directions. I worry about the North Koreans. I mean, you guys are all familiar with, electromagnetic pulse bombs. Not that I think you're necessarily going to have one here in Raleigh, but I can tell you in New York, I get that question from our board every quarter. What are we going to do in the event of some kind of scenario like that? And at the same time, I do think your businesses, just in terms of the data that they have and the money that you have access to, certainly could potentially be targeted for monetary purposes. So it's all of the above, because you guys needed more to be worried about.
I will pick on one thing, and you said EMP. We actually do have a substation that we've tested with one of our research organizations, a Wake EMC for EMP type attack. Let's ask another question. Laura?
Thank you, Rachel. In what ways do you anticipate artificial intelligence impacting cybersecurity?
Well, so you see this idea, I guess I would characterize it this way, Laura. It's lowered the barrier to entry to being a quite sophisticated hacker. So now, like if someone wants to go bad, either an internal actor, and I would argue that all of you are one disgruntled employee away from having your own hacktivist problem. So someone who wants to do bad can now do so much more readily than they would have been able to a few years ago. That said, all is not lost. I mean, I can tell you now, we're defending about 99.9% of the attacks that we experience, which, I mean, for me at Morgan Stanley is about 40 per second. 99.9 of those we're defending entirely with artificial intelligence. So I would argue this is very much like a cat and mouse game. The good guys are winning some, the bad guys are winning others. I think the jury is out on whether this is going to end up being material in either direction. And then don't even ask me about quantum computing, because when we get there, that's going to be just sort of game over.
That's very helpful. We have time for one more, but I do, if folks have questions and we didn't call on you, to please come up afterwards. It's hard with the lights. Is it Josh? I thought you saw your hand up. There you are.
Rachel, is there one area that you've consistently seen a disconnect between the leadership of an organization and the folks that are responsible for security?
So, Josh, I'm so glad you're asking this question because this is a little bit of like a bugaboo for me. I see the leadership viewing this as like an IT problem. And in fact, this is a whole of company problem. So one of the things, we talk about these ransomware attacks. I have the CEO telling me hand over heart that all of his data is backed up, right? That like he could withstand a cyber attack because he knows he's got backups. Then I go talk to his technologist who's like, oh, yeah, that guy who did that doesn't work here anymore. He left, no documentation. All we found in his desk was a copy of Windows for Dummies. I'm not feeling so good about our backup strategy anymore. The other thing the CEO will tell me is everyone knows what they're supposed to do. Really? Have you practiced that? Like, have you actually done, I love these, right? Tabletop exercise where you seat your C-suite around the table and everybody knows what their job is. Do you even know how to pay a ransom if you decided you want to? Does your general counsel have someone on speed dial who could facilitate, negotiate a ransom payment for you? That's probably different than what we've done before. We would argue that the entire leadership team needs to think about what they would do in the event of their cyber bad day and actually practice this on a regular basis. So Josh, knowing a little bit about you in advance, because we did prepare, guys, I would tell you, I want you, maybe on a low energy day, to unleash the gremlins in your environment. So one of the things I get to do at Morgan Stanley that I find very fun, and that means I'm not winning any popularity contests, is I get to go around sort of pulling the metaphorical plug every once in a while just to see what happens. So if your team tells you that they can restore from bare metal in X number of hours, make them show you. Craziest day I ever had with one of our banking regulators. They came in and said, okay, Rachel, in the event of an EMP scenario, how quickly could you restore from bare metal with all of your client data and all of your client positions? And I was like, 4 hours, I can do it. They said, go. And I looked at them and I'm like, it's Tuesday in the middle of a trading day. You don't really mean that, right? Guy looks at his watch and says, now you're down to 3 hours and 59 minutes. Show me that you can do it. Make your teams show you that they can do it.
Rachel, thank you very much. If everybody would help me thanking. She's going to be up here, so please join. Thank you very much.